Welcome to a Drexel University English Language Center presentation on grammar and sentence structure. My name is Bill Albertson, and today I am going to talk about complex sentences with adjective clauses. Before we begin, you might find it easier to hear this presentation if you use headphones. In addition, find the video pause button and use it whenever you need more time to read the slides. By the end of this module, you should be able to identify restrictive and non-restrictive adjective clauses, choose the appropriate relative pronoun to introduce an adjective clause, and correctly punctuate complex sentences with adjective clauses. You'll remember that there are three types of dependent clauses in English. We have adverb clauses, which we discussed in the last module, adjective clauses, which will be the topic of this module, and noun clauses, which we'll look at in the next module. Let's look at what an adjective clause is. An adjective clause is a group of words that give us more information about whatever noun comes before it. It further defines that noun just as any adjective would. Adjective clauses start with a relative pronoun. Relative pronouns include the words that, which, who, whom, and whose, where, and why. In English, we have two types of adjective clauses. The first type is the restrictive adjective clause, which provides necessary and important information about the noun that it modifies. Without the restrictive adjective clause, we don't know what our speaker is talking about. A non-restrictive adjective clause, on the other hand, gives us extra information about the noun that it modifies. Without the non-restrictive adjective clause, we still know what the speaker is talking about. Now, let's take a closer look at restrictive adjective clauses. Restrictive adjective clauses use the following pronouns. We use that for objects, who for people when they're the subject of the adjective clause, whom for people when they're the object of the adjective clause, and whose for people when we have possession. We use where for places and when for time. Please keep in mind that we do not use a comma with restrictive adjective clauses. Now, let's look at some examples. In the first example, we have Bobby sang the song that Lisa likes. The independent clause is Bobby sang the song, but we don't know what song Bobby sang. We need more information. So we add the adjective clause that Lisa likes. Now, we know about the song that Bobby sang. In the second example, we have the man who is singing karaoke is Bobby. The independent clause is the man is Bobby, but we don't know which man is Bobby. We need more information. So we add the dependent clause who is singing karaoke. Now, we know which man is Bobby. Also, notice that who is the subject of the dependent clause. Who is singing karaoke? The man is singing karaoke. So, we use the word who because our relative pronoun is the subject of the adjective clause. For our next example, we have the man whom I saw yesterday is Bobby. Again, the independent clause is the man is Bobby. We need additional information, so we add the dependent clause whom I saw yesterday. In this case, whom is the object of the dependent clause. I saw the man yesterday. I is the subject. One easy way to determine whether you need who or whom is whether it's followed by a subject. If you have a subject after the relative pronoun, most likely you're going to need whom and not who. In our next example, we have the man to whom I spoke yesterday is Bobby. Again, our independent clause is the man is Bobby. We need more information, so we add the dependent clause to whom I spoke yesterday. In this case, we have a preposition. I spoke to Bobby yesterday. In formal written English, when we have a preposition, it has to stay with the noun that it modifies. In this case, it modifies the relative pronoun whom. So the preposition has to move to the front of the dependent clause to stay with the relative pronoun that it modifies, which means that we get to whom. For our final example, we have the house to which we drove is Bobby's. In this sentence, the independent clause is the house is Bobby's. Which house is Bobby's? The house to which we drove. You'll notice that we don't say to that we drove. That's because in English, that cannot be preceded by a preposition. If we have a preposition, we change the relative pronoun that to which, but it has exactly the same meaning. Now, let's take a look at non-restrictive adjective clauses. Non-restrictive adjective clauses, you'll remember, give additional information about the nouns that they modify. The information in the non-restrictive adjective clause is not always necessary to know what the speaker's talking about. Non-restrictive adjective clauses use almost the same relative pronouns as restrictive adjective clauses. One difference is that non-restrictive adjective clauses use which for objects. They use who for people when they're the subject, whom for people when they're the object, and whose for people when there's possession. They use where for places and when for time. So the only relative pronoun in non-restrictive adjective clauses that is different from restrictive adjective clauses is which for objects. Note that we use a comma before non-restrictive adjective clauses. The comma differentiates non-restrictive from restrictive adjective clauses in many situations. Now, let's look at some examples of complex sentences with non-restrictive adjective clauses. For our first example, we have Bobby sang Thriller, which is Lisa's favorite song. The independent clause here is Bobby sang Thriller. The name Thriller tells us exactly what song Bobby sang, so we really don't need any additional information to know what song Bobby sang. We may choose to give additional information with a non-restrictive adjective clause. In this case, we added the information which is Lisa's favorite song. This information is not necessary to know what song Bobby sang. Notice that when we have a non-restrictive adjective clause, we also use a comma. Let's look at another example. Bobby met Sam, whom you met last week. In this case, Bobby met Sam is the independent clause. With the name Sam, we know exactly who Bobby met. We may add additional information by writing whom you met last week as a non-restrictive adjective clause, perhaps to remind you who Sam is, but it's not necessary information in the sentence. Again, we use a comma because we have a non-restrictive adjective clause. We could also say, I am staying at the Hilton where you stayed before. I am staying at the Hilton is an independent clause. The Hilton is a specific name. We know exactly which hotel the person stayed at. We don't need any additional information. We may choose to give additional information in a dependent clause, where you stayed before. Again, this is a non-restrictive adjective clause, so we use a comma. Now, let's practice. For this exercise, I would like you to combine each of these pairs of sentences using an adjective clause. Be sure to choose the correct relative pronoun and correctly punctuate each sentence. Pause the video while you write your answers on a separate sheet of paper. Press the play button when you are finished to see the correct answers. Okay, now let's go over the answers. For the first example, we have I ate the meal and you cooked the meal. To put these together, we would write I ate the meal that you cooked. Please be careful not to repeat the noun in the second clause. We do not say I ate the meal that you cooked the meal. The pronoun that takes the place of the noun the meal. In the second example, we have I talked to Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith is my teacher. To put these together, we have I talked to Mrs. Smith, who is my teacher. In this case, it is clear who Mrs. Smith is. Who is my teacher is additional information. So this is a non-restrictive adjective clause, and we need a comma. In the third example, we have I went to the Gap. They sell clothes at the Gap. To put these together, we would write I went to the Gap where they sell clothes. Again, the Gap is a specific name, so the adjective clause is non-restrictive. It's extra information. In the fourth example, we have I saw the man. I met the man yesterday. We put these together by writing I saw the man whom I met yesterday. The man is undefined. We need additional information. So this is a restrictive adjective clause. We use the relative pronoun whom because the man is the object of the adjective clause. This concludes our presentation on complex sentences with adjective clauses. In the next module, we will discuss complex sentences with noun clauses. Remember, if you need additional help, you can always schedule a language support tutoring appointment through the Drexel ELC at the link listed here. Thanks for watching.